Ethan had always believed that ordinary evenings were safe, that nothing life-changing ever happened during routine moments, but that belief quietly shattered the instant he stepped into Ryan's house on that calm Sunday night, because from the very first second something felt slightly off, like the air itself was holding its breath. The living room looked the same as always, shoes by the door, soft yellow lights, a familiar smell of pizza and soda, Ryan laughing too loudly at something on the TV, yet Ethan sensed a strange pull he couldn't explain, a feeling that made him slow his steps without knowing why, and when he glanced toward the kitchen, his heart skipped in a way that surprised him, because Claire was standing there, Ryan's older sister, leaning casually against the counter as if she had been there for hours waiting, her presence calm but heavy, her eyes steady and thoughtful, watching him with a focus that made him suddenly aware of himself, of his posture, of the fact that his voice caught slightly when he greeted her. Claire was someone Ethan had known for years, not closely, but enough to recognize her usual distance, her polite smiles, her quiet exits from family gatherings, and yet tonight she seemed different, more open, more awake, as if something inside her had shifted and was quietly spilling out, and Ethan felt uneasy because he knew, even without thinking it through, that she belonged in a category his mind had always labeled as unreachable, off limits, not because of rules written anywhere, but because some lines felt permanent and necessary, especially when friendship and loyalty were involved. Ryan, completely unaware, tossed Ethan a drink and went back to the game, leaving Ethan standing awkwardly, feeling Claire's gaze return to him again, not quick or accidental, but intentional, lingering just long enough to make his chest tighten, and when he finally excused himself to get water, hoping to escape that strange tension, he found Claire already there, stepping aside to make room, her arm brushing his lightly, a simple touch that felt louder than it should have, and in that moment Ethan understood something dangerous was beginning, even if he couldn't name it yet. They exchanged small talk, the kind people used to stay comfortable, but her voice sounded softer, slower, like she was choosing each word carefully, and when she asked how he had been lately, not casually but sincerely, Ethan felt a flicker of surprise, because no one usually asked him that way, not expecting a real answer, and before he knew it, he was answering honestly, speaking about work stress, about feeling stuck, about the quiet fear of drifting through life without direction, and Claire listened, really listened, her eyes steady, her expression thoughtful, nodding slightly as if his words mattered more than politeness. The conversation should have ended there, but instead it deepened without effort, moving into pauses that felt meaningful rather than awkward. And when Ryan called out from the living room, asking Ethan to hurry up, Claire hesitated, then said softly that she wanted to talk for a minute, just a minute, and something in her tone made Ethan agree before his mind could argue, leading them to the back porch where the night air was cool and still, the city quiet, the lights dim, and the space between them suddenly felt private in a way that made Ethan's heart race. Claire leaned against the railing, crossing her arms, not defensively but thoughtfully, speaking about how life rarely turns out the way people expect, how choices made early can quietly shape everything that comes after, and as she spoke, Ethan noticed her wedding ring catching the porch light as her fingers moved slowly, twisting it as if it were heavy, uncomfortable, or unfamiliar, and that small detail unsettled him more than her words, because it hinted at thoughts she wasn't fully sharing. She laughed softly at something he said, but the laugh carried a hint of sadness, and when she met his eyes again, her expression shifted, becoming serious, almost vulnerable, and she admitted, not dramatically but honestly, that sometimes people wake up years later feeling like they missed a version of themselves they never got to be, and Ethan felt an unexpected ache in his chest because he understood that feeling too well, even though he was much younger, and the realization that they shared something emotional, something unspoken, felt both comforting and dangerous. The moment stretched, quiet and heavy, until Claire took a small step closer, not touching him but closing the distance enough that Ethan could feel her presence clearly, and she lowered her voice, saying she didn't want him to misunderstand, that she wasn't trying to cause trouble, that she just needed to say certain things out loud, to someone who felt safe, and Ethan nodded even though his thoughts were tangled, because part of him wanted to believe this was harmless, just two people talking honestly, while another part warned him that honesty could be the most dangerous thing of all. When they finally went back inside, the noise and laughter felt distant, unreal, as if Ethan had stepped into a different version of the same room, and Claire returned to her calm, polite self, but now Ethan knew it was an act, and that knowledge followed him long after he left the house, driving home with his mind replaying the way she looked at him, the weight in her words, the quiet intensity of that brief moment on the porch, and as he lay awake later that night, staring at the ceiling, he tried to convince himself that nothing had happened, that he was imagining things, that life would return to normal by morning, but deep down he knew the truth, that a door had opened, softly and without permission, and once opened, it could never be completely closed again, because something had shifted inside him, something emotional and fragile, something that whispered that ordinary nights were not always safe, and that sometimes, without warning, a single look could begin a story no one was prepared to tell. After that night, Ethan tried to convince himself that nothing had really changed, but the days that followed proved him wrong in quiet, persistent ways, because Claire began appearing in his life more often, not suddenly or dramatically, but through small moments that slowly added weight to his thoughts, like a message asking if he had reached home safely, or a short note commenting on a song he had once mentioned, and each message felt harmless on its own yet meaningful in the way it made him pause before replying, choosing words carefully, aware that something delicate was forming between them. Ethan reminded himself who she was and what she represented, repeating the truth like a rule he couldn't break, but emotions do not listen to rules, and as their conversations grew longer, they moved past polite topics into deeper ones, sharing frustrations, quiet fears, and memories that shaped them, and Claire spoke openly about feeling unseen in her own life, about how she had done everything expected of her, how she had followed the path that looked right from the outside but felt empty when she was alone, and Ethan listened with growing concern, because her honesty felt raw, not flirtatious, not careless, but deeply human, and that made it harder to step away. He noticed how she always chose her words gently, never crossing a clear line, never saying anything openly inappropriate, yet the emotion behind her messages carried a warmth that lingered long after he put his phone down, and Ethan found himself waiting for her replies more than he wanted to admit, feeling a strange comfort in knowing someone understood him without explanation. Days turned into weeks, and their connection grew quietly, without witnesses, without names, existing only in thoughtful messages and late-night conversations that ended with unsaid thoughts hanging between them, and even though Ethan never mentioned it to Ryan, the guilt sat heavy in his chest, because he knew that even without physical closeness, something emotional was unfolding. Something that felt personal and dangerous. One afternoon, while rain fell steadily outside, Ethan ran into Claire at a small cafe near downtown, a meeting that seemed accidental but felt loaded with meaning the moment their eyes met, and they shared an awkward smile before deciding to sit together, telling themselves it was harmless, just coffee, just conversation. Yet the hours slipped by unnoticed as they talked about books, childhood memories, and the quiet moments in life that shape people more than major events, and Claire laughed freely in a way Ethan had never seen before, her guard lowered, her eyes bright yet thoughtful, and Ethan realized how rare it was to be around someone who felt both familiar and mysterious at the same time. As the rain softened outside, the cafe grew quieter, and their conversation slowed into meaningful pauses, moments where words weren't necessary. And when Ethan finally stood to leave, aware that staying longer would only deepen what he was trying to avoid, Claire reached for his hand instinctively, stopping just short of touching him, her fingers hovering in the space between them as if testing an invisible boundary, and the silence that followed was heavy with emotion, because in that moment both of them understood what they were risking, and Claire pulled her hand back, her voice shaking slightly as she admitted that she didn't know how to ignore what she felt. That she wasn't proud of it, that it scared her, and Ethan felt torn between compassion and responsibility, because part of him wanted to protect her, to stay and listen, while another part warned him that continuing would only lead to pain for everyone involved. He told her softly that this wasn't right, that Ryan mattered, that her marriage mattered, and Claire nodded, tears forming but not falling, saying she already knew all of that, that knowing didn't make the feelings disappear. And when they parted ways outside the cafe, standing under the gray sky, neither of them reached for the other, yet the distance between them felt more painful than closeness ever could. After that day, Ethan tried harder to pull back, responding less, keeping his words short, but Claire didn't push or demand anything, which somehow made it harder, because her respect for his space only deepened his feelings, and he found himself thinking about her late at night, wondering how someone could feel so lonely while surrounded by people, and whether moments like theirs happened for a reason or simply as a test of character. Claire, meanwhile, struggled quietly, returning home each night to a life that felt increasingly distant, carrying conversations in her heart that she couldn't share with anyone else, and though she never blamed Ethan or asked him for more, the weight of her emotions became clear in the softness of her words, in the way she described feeling invisible even while standing beside her husband, and Ethan realized with growing sadness that he had become a mirror for something she had been avoiding for years. Despite his efforts to step away, the connection lingered, not loud or dramatic, but steady and unresolved, like a song playing quietly in the background of his life, and Ethan understood that this was no longer a simple misunderstanding or passing moment, but the beginning of a deeper conflict that would demand a choice, because emotions, once awakened, do not fade easily, and even without a single inappropriate act, the bond they shared had already crossed into dangerous territory, leaving Ethan caught between loyalty and longing, knowing that whatever came next would change everything. After weeks of quiet tension and subtle messages, Ethan and Claire's connection deepened in ways neither of them could have predicted, because what had started as small conversations evolved into a consistent presence in each other's lives, a routine of shared thoughts and unspoken understanding that felt simultaneously comforting and dangerous. And Ethan couldn't deny the way his chest tightened when her name appeared on his phone, or the way he smiled at the memory of her laughter even when he was supposed to be focused on work. Claire, too, found herself thinking of Ethan in moments when she felt alone, replaying their conversations, the way he listened without judgment, how he noticed details about her that no one else ever seemed to, and though she tried to suppress the emotions stirring inside her, they grew persistent, pressing at the edges of her carefully constructed life, making her wonder how a friendship could feel so much like intimacy without a single word spoken about desire. The tension between them became a constant undertone in their interactions, subtle but undeniable, and even when they met casually, passing in a hallway, chatting briefly over a text, or laughing at a shared memory, the air seemed charged, each glance and slight touch amplified by the knowledge that something had shifted, that a boundary had been crossed emotionally even if physically nothing had happened, and Ethan struggled to reconcile his feelings with his loyalty to Ryan, to the friendship he had valued for years, and to the respect he still had for Claire's life and marriage. One rainy afternoon, fate, or coincidence, led them both to a quiet cafe downtown, a place neither had planned to visit yet both ended up at the same time, and as they sat together, the conversation flowed naturally, effortlessly, covering topics from childhood memories to personal dreams, regrets, and the quiet loneliness that often accompanies adult life, and Ethan realized that being around Claire felt like both home and adventure at the same time, a paradox that excited and terrified him. As they talked, Claire laughed freely, leaning forward slightly, her eyes bright yet thoughtful, and Ethan felt a pull he hadn't allowed himself to feel before, an emotional gravity that drew him closer without him even trying, and though they spoke carefully, each word measured, the pauses between their sentences carried weight, filled with meaning and longing, and in those pauses, both sensed what neither wanted to say aloud, the desire, the curiosity, the undeniable attraction that lingered in the space between them. When Ethan finally stood to leave, feeling both elated and conflicted, Claire instinctively reached for his hand, stopping just short, the air between them thick with tension, and whispered that she didn't know how to ignore what she felt, that it scared her but also felt impossible to deny, and Ethan's heart ached because he knew exactly how she felt, yet responsibility and loyalty kept his hand from meeting hers, kept him from giving into the magnetic pull of the moment, and they parted that day without touch, but the memory of that near connection stayed with Ethan, a quiet echo in his thoughts that refused to fade. After that encounter, their interactions continued with a new, unspoken awareness, every conversation carrying subtle undertones, every glance and message layered with emotional meaning, and even casual moments felt charged, like the air itself waited for them to speak a truth they weren't ready to voice, and Ethan realized that Claire had become a mirror for his own hidden feelings, someone who saw him fully, not as Ryan's friend, not as a younger man, but as a person with desires and fears he had long buried. Claire, meanwhile, struggled with guilt and longing in equal measure, caught between the life she had built and the emotions Ethan had awakened in her. And though she maintained politeness and distance in public, her private thoughts were full of him, replaying moments, imagining conversations, wondering if she could ever step back and preserve the safety of normalcy. Despite the restraint on both sides, the bond between them grew stronger, quiet but undeniable, a delicate web of emotional intimacy that pulled them together even as they tried to resist. And Ethan found himself thinking about her in unexpected moments, daydreaming of her smile, imagining her laughter, and feeling a warmth that conflicted with the loyalty he felt. To Ryan, in the solitude of his apartment at night, Ethan reviewed every interaction, every laugh, every glance, realizing how much he depended on these small connections, how they had begun to shape his daily moods, his hopes, and even his sense of self, and he understood that what was happening between them was no longer casual or trivial, it was emotional intimacy that could not be ignored, a quiet kind of romance that existed in gestures, words, and silences, and yet the weight of consequences pressed on him, because crossing this emotional boundary had already begun to complicate lives, and he feared what might happen if they allowed their feelings to grow into something undeniable. Claire felt the same conflict, living with the pull of attraction and the constraints of her own life, and every message she sent, every laugh she shared, carried a mix of joy and sorrow, excitement and guilt, because while she longed for connection, she understood the dangers of indulging emotions that belonged outside the lines of conventional expectation. As the weeks passed, the tension became a steady undercurrent in both their lives, shaping decisions, coloring thoughts, and amplifying feelings, and even as Ethan reminded himself to pull back, to stay loyal, to respect boundaries, he realized that emotional attachment was not something one could control with willpower alone, and the more he resisted, the stronger the bond seemed to become, a force quiet but relentless, pulling both of them into a story that was unfolding naturally, dangerously, beautifully, and with every passing day, Ethan and Claire faced the undeniable truth that they had created an emotional world together, one that neither could leave without feeling a profound sense of loss, a bittersweet awareness that what they shared was unique, fragile, and life-changing, even if it could never fully exist in the open, and that realization hung over them like a soft, persistent storm, shaping every thought, every word, and every heartbeat. Weeks of quiet tension and stolen moments had built to a point where Ethan felt both drawn to Claire and desperate to step back, and he had decided that the only way to protect everyone involved, including himself, Claire, and Ryan, was to create distance, to stop responding to her messages, to avoid the cafe, and to bury the emotions that had grown too large to ignore. Yet before he could act, the situation shifted dramatically in a way that left him reeling. One evening, Ryan arrived unannounced at Ethan's apartment, his face pale and exhausted, his eyes heavy with worry and hurt, and Ethan could immediately sense that something serious had happened, because the usual joking, teasing Ryan had carried for years was gone, replaced by a quiet tension that made Ethan's stomach twist, and when Ryan finally spoke, he revealed that Claire had moved out of her house, that she wanted a divorce, and that her unhappiness had reached a point he hadn't anticipated, leaving Ryan bewildered and heartbroken. Ethan listened in shock as Ryan went on, describing conversations he had had with Claire, the silent distance growing between them, the way she had told him she felt invisible, unnoticed, and disconnected from the life they had built together, and as Ryan spoke, Ethan felt a complex mix of guilt, fear, and helplessness, because everything he had tried to contain, the feelings, the tension, the unspoken connection, suddenly felt exposed, as if their private emotional bond had consequences far beyond what he could manage, and the reality hit him hard. Claire's decisions were now public, affecting lives, and he was entwined in that truth whether he wanted to be or not. After Ryan left, Ethan received a call from Claire, her voice trembling, raw with emotion yet steadier than he expected, and she admitted that she hadn't planned for her life to take this turn, that she had struggled for years feeling unseen, and that meeting Ethan, talking to him, had awakened something inside her she couldn't ignore, something that made her question the choices she had made and the life she had settled into, and Ethan, listening carefully, felt both compassion and fear, knowing that while he cared deeply for her, acting on these emotions could shatter lives in ways he wasn't prepared to manage. As they spoke, Claire confessed the conflict that had been quietly building in her heart, how she had longed to be noticed, to be understood, to feel alive in ways her marriage no longer allowed, and how Ethan had become a mirror for those feelings, reflecting a version of herself she had lost along the years, and he understood with painful clarity that their bond, built on trust and emotional intimacy, had become a catalyst for life-altering decisions that were unfolding faster than he could intervene, yet at the same time, he felt powerless to deny the depth of connection they shared, a connection that transcended friendship, that spoke to loneliness, understanding, and longing, and it terrified him to recognize that the emotional intimacy they had cultivated could not simply be undone. Over the next few days, Ethan wrestled with the weight of this new reality, balancing empathy for Claire, guilt over the impact on Ryan, and his own feelings that refused to be quieted, replaying every moment, every laugh, every subtle glance, every conversation that had drawn them together, and realizing that what had started as small messages and cafe conversations had grown into something far more significant, something that had the power to reshape lives and relationships in ways he had never imagined, leaving him standing at a crossroads between acting on what his heart wanted and protecting the lives of those around him. He confronted himself repeatedly, thinking through the ethical and emotional implications, questioning whether stepping back would be enough, whether silence and distance could truly protect everyone involved, and acknowledging the truth that some connections are not bound by timing or circumstance, that they emerge whether we are ready or not, forcing difficult choices upon us and demanding emotional accountability. And Ethan recognized that the story between him and Claire had shifted irreversibly, that their bond was no longer casual or contained, but a powerful emotional force that was influencing decisions, breaking patterns, and challenging the very structure of the lives they had known. Claire, aware of the upheaval, tried to navigate her feelings while managing the consequences of her choices, speaking to Ethan with honesty, confessing fears, regrets, and the profound longing that had emerged, and he listened with care, acknowledging her pain while trying to maintain boundaries, aware that any step toward indulgence could unravel the delicate threads holding their worlds together. In those conversations, Ethan realized that love and emotional connection are rarely neat or simple, that sometimes they arrive as disruptive forces, reshaping priorities, forcing reflection, and revealing truths that were long suppressed, and he felt a painful mix of responsibility, desire, and helplessness, knowing that Claire's life, Ryan's heart, and his own integrity were intertwined in a complex emotional landscape he had never asked to navigate, yet could not ignore. The tension built not with dramatic gestures but with quiet, consistent awareness of each other's presence, messages, and thoughts, creating a space in their lives where honesty and longing existed together. And Ethan understood that the stakes were higher than he had ever imagined, that their connection was no longer a private emotional current but a force influencing choices, triggering consequences, and demanding reckoning, leaving him with the impossible task of honoring truth, respecting friendship, and acknowledging human desire, all at once, and realizing that the emotional journey with Claire had become a turning point in his life, one that would shape his understanding of love, responsibility, and sacrifice, and teach him that sometimes, even the strongest feelings cannot be acted upon without careful thought, because lives, hearts, and trust are fragile, and navigating them requires courage, honesty, and the willingness to make painful choices that leave lasting impact on everyone involved. After the revelations of Claire's decision to leave her marriage, Ethan felt an unbearable mix of relief, fear, and sorrow, because while a part of him longed to be close to her, another part knew that acting on desire would bring pain to everyone involved, and he realized that the strongest kind of love is not always the kind that is pursued, but the kind that is respected and managed with care, and so he made a choice that would haunt him yet feel necessary. He decided to step back completely, to create distance, to allow Claire to navigate her new life without his influence, and to protect Ryan from further heartbreak. Even as his own heart ached with longing for the woman who had changed him in ways no one else could, he sent Claire a carefully written message, filled with honesty, explaining that he cared deeply for her, that their bond had awakened something real and profound, but that he could not be the catalyst for further pain, that she deserved a life built on truth, not secrecy, and that Ryan, despite everything, deserved honesty and closure. And though the words were difficult to type, he felt a strange calm afterward, as if acknowledging the truth allowed him to release a piece of the emotional weight he had carried for months. And in sending the message, he hoped that Claire would understand the depth of his feelings while also respecting the boundaries he had set, knowing that sometimes love requires restraint, not indulgence. Claire read the message in silence, the weight of his words sinking in, and though she felt the pull to respond impulsively, to reach out and bridge the gap that had formed. She respected his choice, realizing that Ethan's honesty was a reflection of the care and respect that had always defined their connection. And in that moment, she understood that stepping back did not diminish their bond but rather honored it, acknowledging the power and intensity of their emotional intimacy while also protecting the lives they both valued. Weeks turned into months, and life moved forward with quiet persistence, Ryan gradually healing from the shock of Claire's departure, reclaiming pieces of his life, finding stability, and Ethan carrying the memory of their connection like a secret flame, bright yet contained, shaping his understanding of love, longing, and the difficult choices that adulthood demands. And while the emotional ache remained, it became a source of reflection rather than despair, a reminder that not all love is meant to be acted upon, that some bonds exist to teach, to awaken, and to change us without consuming us completely. Then, one day, years later, Ethan found himself walking through a city art exhibit, a place he had visited for inspiration, and unexpectedly ran into Claire, who was attending the same event, her presence familiar yet transformed, radiant in a way that reflected both freedom and acceptance. And as they greeted each other, the initial awkwardness faded into warmth, a gentle acknowledgement of the shared history that had forever connected them. And in that encounter, Ethan realized that the bond they had forged, intense, emotional, life-altering, was still alive, but in a form that was sustainable, respectful, and free from the complications that had once threatened to overwhelm them. They talked casually, laughing softly at shared memories, exchanging thoughts about art, life, and personal growth, and Ethan noted the subtle changes in her demeanor, the lightness in her voice, the clarity in her eyes, all signs that she had moved forward, healed, and reclaimed her life in ways that he had hoped for but dared not assume. And in observing her, he felt a quiet pride and relief, recognizing that their story had shaped her journey as much as it had shaped his own, leaving a lasting imprint without causing irreparable damage. As the evening progressed, they shared a moment of quiet reflection, pausing in front of a painting that seemed to capture the complexity of life's unexpected turns, and Claire turned to him with a soft, wistful smile, acknowledging the role he had played in awakening something essential within her, something that had encouraged her to take risks, embrace honesty, and pursue authenticity. And Ethan realized that some connections exist not to fulfill desires but to illuminate paths, to awaken truths, and to leave enduring lessons that guide choices, hearts, and understanding of love. When it was time to part, they did so with warmth, a lingering sense of affection, and no expectation, no pressure, simply the knowledge that they had forever changed each other's lives. And as Ethan walked away, he felt a strange mix of melancholy and peace, because he understood that sometimes the strongest and most meaningful love is the one we release, that the people who impact us most profoundly are not always the ones we hold on to, and that emotional intimacy, once awakened, continues to influence us quietly, shaping who we are, how we see the world, and how we engage with love, life, and human connection. In that moment, Ethan reflected on months of tension, longing, ethical struggles, and personal growth, recognizing that every laugh, every glance, every word exchanged with Claire had been a lesson in patience, empathy, and the complexity of human emotion. And though their romantic connection had never been realized in the way his heart initially wished, it had matured into a profound understanding of love's nuances, teaching him that caring deeply for someone sometimes means stepping back, honoring boundaries, and allowing life to unfold naturally. Claire, too, left the exhibit carrying a sense of gratitude, a quiet acknowledgement that Ethan had been the catalyst for her self-awareness and transformation, and that while the emotional intensity they had shared would always remain a part of her story, it was now integrated into her life in a way that was constructive, freeing, and peaceful, providing a reference point for emotional honesty, respect, and mindful decision-making in future relationships. Walking through the city streets afterward, Ethan felt a mixture of closure and ongoing reflection, knowing that life does not always follow desire but often teaches through restraint, that love's impact is not measured solely by fulfillment but by growth, understanding, and the enduring influence of emotional bonds. And as he continued onward, he carried the knowledge that some encounters, some connections, and some loves exist not to be possessed, but to awaken the best parts of ourselves, leaving us wiser, more compassionate, and more attuned to the delicate balance between longing, responsibility, and human connection, a lesson that would resonate for the rest of his life. A quiet reminder that the people we meet sometimes come into our lives not to stay, but to change us forever, and that in letting go, we honor both them and ourselves.